Israeli terrorists have slaughtered 38 more starving Palestinians in Gaza today. Today's massacre took place amidst a visit by Donald Trump's envoy on literally everything, Steve Witkoff, to Gaza. He was also joined by the US ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee. That tells you everything about just how honest this billionaire Jewish property tycoon has been in his so called negotiations in the Middle East. And if the massacre of 38 desperately hungry people wasn't enough, three more people were killed by the forced starvation. This means that 162 Palestinians have now been killed as a result of the forced starvation by war criminal Benjamin Netanyahu and his genocidal maniac friends from the West in the last few days alone. Meanwhile, the BBC has continued to disgrace the profession of journalism and act as a cheerleader of Israel's genocidal campaign, even when known supporters of Israel have now begun to call the goings on in Gaza as a genocide. Let's look at these developments in a greater detail. Witkoff, a billionaire American property tycoon, was in Gaza today, along with his Zionist friend Mike Huckabee. You would have expected Israeli terrorists and their American mercenaries from the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation to show a little bit of humanity for a change and not kill starving people who had gathered to collect food. But expecting Israeli terrorists and their friends from the US of humanity is simply an unrealistic proposition. They slaughtered 38 more people after luring them with food. Now you can understand the level of depravity these evil people from Israel and the US suffer from. Witkoff, who is supposed to be an honest broker, at least that's what he wants all of us to believe, that he is an honest broker of peace in the region. He was so honest that he didn't even bother meeting UN representatives working in Gaza. This didn't go unnoticed amongst the regional experts. Mohammed Al Masri, a professor in the Media Studies program at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies, he told Al Jazeera that Witkoff refusing to meet UN aid workers in Gaza was a sign that he was in the region to merely fulfill the US propaganda agenda. His words, not mine. Al Masri said, and I quote, "This is a classic case of selective exposure. Witkoff and US Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, want to see what they want to see because they have a pro Israeli propaganda agenda to fulfill. They are obviously not going to meet the UN or look at any of the UN sites because that would undermine their propaganda program. We have seen Israel and the United States work very aggressively to undermine the UN and attack the UN over the past 22 months or so of this genocide." End quote. I wonder how people like Witkoff and Huckabee sleep at night. And the Qatari Prime Minister was proudly describing Witkoff as his friend during his interview with Tucker Carlson not too long ago. Doesn't it explain why the slave rulers from the Gulf countries have behaved in the way that they have on the issue of Gaza? No wonder the plight of starving Palestinians has not moved these corrupt rulers of the Arab countries. They are happy as long as their masters from the US and Israel are happy with them. How did the BBC report today's massacre from Gaza's so-called aid distribution sites? The BBC interviewed a senior functionary from the Human Rights Watch. Bilqis Villa told the BBC that the system of distributing aid by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation was inherently lethal.
What we've been hearing from Palestinian aid seekers who've gone to these Gaza Humanitarian Foundation distribution sites in order to get, the urgently needed food to feed their families is that the entire journey, as they arrive at these sites, as they're held by the Israeli military before they're allowed to enter these sites, and then while they're actually inside the sites, can be deadly. The Israeli military is at the entrance of these sites. All of these sites were selected in terms of location by the military. These are in militarized zones in parts of Gaza that have been razed to the ground where military operations are ongoing. People are held at the entrances for hours with tanks. and tank fire is hitting people as they're waiting if they make a move that makes the Israeli military want to stop them. And then once the tank pulls back, that's the signal. People realize that they're allowed to enter the distribution sites. And then it's just a chaotic free-for-all with people running in. And what we've heard from witnesses at these sites and from a former contractor is that the American contractors at these sites on the inside are firing live ammunition at Palestinians and firing less lethal munitions that are also dangerous for civilians.
And no sooner had Villa concluded her conversation with the BBC, presenter Ben Brown uttered this disgusting line.
That was Belkis Villa, Associate Director of Crisis and Conflict at Human Rights Watch. And just to reiterate what we mentioned earlier on, from Israel's point of view, Israel says its troops do not intentionally open fire on civilians, and it also accuses Hamas of instigating chaos near these aid distribution sites, one of which Steve Witkoff has been visiting today.
The fact that these BBC presenters like Ben Brown enjoying obscene salaries at the expense of our tax money called the license fee are still caring to present the Israeli terrorist site tells you everything about the disgraced organization's twisted editorial direction. Have you ever seen these clowns presenting the Palestinian side after their interviews with Israelis? Have you seen them present the Russian perspective each time they interviewed the Ukrainians? No. This Ben Brown chap did this on a day his own colleague from the World Service, Stephanie Hegarty, compiled a list of 160 Gaza children, many of whom were shot in the chest and head by Israeli terrorists.
The BBC World Service has compiled material on over 160 cases where children have been shot in Gaza and found that in 95 cases, the child was shot in the head or the chest. In most of these cases, the victim was under 12 years old. The cases we found run from the first weeks of the war up to July this year.
To compile this list, we verified media reports, spoke to human rights researchers on the ground, and to 30 doctors and nurses who treated these children.
But even this didn't stop this Ben Brown chap from presenting the Israeli justification to commit a genocide. I know many of you have stopped paying the license fee. I just hope that this rogue organization gets defunded and it is dragged to The Hague someday for its active role that it has played in the ongoing genocide. That's it from me. Thank you very much for your support of this platform and our journalism on buymeacoffee.com and Patreon. If you too think that our journalism is worth supporting, then you too should consider becoming part of it. Details are there in the description of this video. In the meantime, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so, because that's one of the many ways you can support independent journalism. God bless you all.